900,000 German troops assembled near Kursk in July 1943. 70% of Germany's entire Eastern Front armor, all their strategic reserves for Hitler's revenge after a crushing defeat at Stalingrad. 2,700 tanks and assault guns stretched across the horizon, including Germany's newest wonder weapons, 45-ton Panthers and Tigers with guns that could punch through a foot of steel. The Wehrmacht rolled forward with the confidence of an unstoppable force. Every detail of their plan was perfect. Every contingency accounted for. Except British codebreakers working with Stalin. Victories in battle depend on preparation, logistics, and the tools that hold up under pressure. Whether you're building machines, strategies, or software, the same principles apply today. That's where Lovable comes in. Lovable is an AI-powered platform that lets you build apps and websites by describing what you want directly to the AI. In minutes, it creates a working project, skipping the setup that normally takes hours of grueling work, jumping straight into building the part that matters. Bring your dream to life. Build an interactive battle map, a tactics simulator, or a site exploring weapons and strategies through the ages. No coding skills needed. Lovable's AI turns your ideas into real websites or apps, letting you stay in command as your project grows. Lovable is great for anyone testing new ideas, students, startups, or anyone with a spark of inspiration. And the company's already trusted worldwide, with millions of users and $200 million in funding at a $1.8 billion valuation. So if you want to skip the hardest part of coding and take control of your creativity, check out Lovable. Go to lovable.dev and use the code DarkDocsYT20 for 20% off. Valid until October 30th, 2025. The Eastern Front stretched like a jagged wound across the map in early 1943. German forces, still staggering from the crushing defeat at Stalingrad in February, clung to their positions along a precarious line. A massive bulge of Soviet territory, over 100 miles wide, jutted westward near Kursk like a fist punching into German-held ground. Adolf Hitler stared at this bulge and saw an opportunity. His plan, codenamed Operation Citadel, aimed to launch the largest armored offensive in history. They would attack the Kursk salient from both north and south in a pincer movement, encircling and annihilating the Soviet forces. By crushing the Red Army's strongest units, Hitler hoped to force the Soviets onto the defensive, shorten the front line, and buy time to stabilize Germany's crumbling position. To achieve it, the Wehrmacht would commit every remaining strategic reserve, including newly rebuilt panzer divisions and the latest heavy tanks, in a single decisive blow. Not all of Hitler's commanders shared his vision. General Heinz Guderian, the master of armored warfare, raised sharp objections to the offensive, saying, quote, "The entire world doesn't care if we capture Kursk or not." Hitler revealed his own doubts, saying it turned his stomach to think about it. So Guderian pressed his point, retorting, quote, "In that case, your reaction to the problem is the correct one. Leave it alone." Guderian's concern centered on the new Panther tanks being rushed into production. These 45 metric ton machines bristled with powerful, long-barreled 75mm guns and boasted thick frontal armor, 80mm sloped at 55 degrees for maximum protection. Despite their power, they were plagued by mechanical failures, especially in transmissions and final drives. Rushed into service with little testing and crew training incomplete, these complex machines often broke down at critical moments. Regardless, Citadel moved forward. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein commanded Army Group South, while General Walter Model led the 9th Army in the north. Manstein envisioned a swift, decisive breakthrough that would shatter Soviet lines. Model prepared for a methodical, grinding advance through layered defenses. Unknown to the Germans, British intelligence had intercepted their communications and relayed the invasion plans to the Soviets. This precious warning gave the Red Army invaluable time to prepare. Soviet engineers built 8 defensive belts, each 2 to 3 miles deep. Trenches, bunkers, and anti-tank emplacements covered the landscape, backed by dense minefields, over 3,000 per kilometer. Anti-tank guns were placed with precision to concentrate fire on any attempted breakthrough. As spring melted into summer, the scale of gathering forces grew immense. Nearly 900,000 German troops assembled for the attack, supported by 2,700 tanks and self-propelled guns, plus 1,800 aircraft, representing 70% of Germany's Eastern Front armor and 65% of its air power. The Soviets had amassed even greater numbers. 1.9 million soldiers, 5,000 tanks, 25,000 guns, and over 3,000 aircraft. Pre-dawn darkness blanketed the Kursk salient on July 5, 1943. German troops crouched in their forward positions, weapons ready, waiting for the signal to attack. At 2:20 a.m., Soviet artillery, commanded by Konstantin Roskosovsky, unleashed a devastating counter-preparation barrage. Thousands of shells from 152 and 203mm howitzers screamed through the darkness, tearing into German assembly areas and artillery positions. The massive bombardment was designed to shatter enemy formations before they could even begin their attack. German units, caught while forming up for their assault, scattered in confusion. Communication lines snapped. Officers shouted orders through the thunder of explosions as geysers of earth and flame erupted around them. But then came the swift German response. Their artillery batteries, ranging from 105mm light field howitzers to massive 210mm mortars, answered the Soviet fire with their own barrage. Behind that wall of fire, Manstein's main attack gathered force. General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army was widely regarded as, quote, the most powerful striking force ever assembled under a single German commander. Finally, as dawn broke, the battle expanded into the skies above. Soviet Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovix, heavily armored ground attack aircraft, escorted by nimble Lavochkin La-5 fighters, launched surprise strikes toward German airfields near Kharkov. They were looking to catch the Luftwaffe aircraft on the ground before they could take off, but the Germans were ready. Waiting Luftwaffe fighter squadrons, flying Messerschmitt Bf-109G and Focke-Wulf Fw-190A aircraft climbed to intercept the incoming raiders. Fierce dogfights erupted across the morning sky as German experience clashed with Soviet numbers. The air filled with cannon fire, twisting contrails, and burning engines plummeting earthward. By morning's end, Luftwaffe pilots would claim 250 Soviet aircraft destroyed, including 107 Sturmovix. Despite the aerial combat raging overhead, the German ground assault pushed forward. At 5:30 a.m., German infantry divisions, reinforced by Sturmgeschütz III assault guns and companies of formidable Tiger I tanks, their heavy 88mm guns poised to strike, began their advance. 2 Panzer Corps spearheaded the northern push, aiming to punch through the initial Soviet defensive lines. The armored advance had begun. General Walter Model's 9th Army crashed into the northern sector's defenses, immediately encountering a nightmare of obstacles. The advance ground to an agonizing crawl as heavy vehicles struck the first belt of Soviet fortifications. The terrain ahead bristled with thousands of mines per kilometer, creating an invisible wall of destruction. German engineers, essential for breaching these obstacles, inched forward under constant Soviet artillery fire. They worked frantically to clear lanes through the minefields, each path carved at tremendous cost in lives and time. The massive Ferdinand tank destroyers, also called Elefants, were among Germany's most formidable weapons. Armed with 88mm guns, capable of destroying any Soviet tank at long range, and protected by up to 200mm of front armor, they were built to dominate the battlefield. Lacking machine guns for close defense, they relied on armor and firepower to control the fight. Kursk was their combat debut. Commanders hoped their long-range guns and heavy armor would overcome minefields and fortifications, clearing the way for panzers. Of 45 Ferdinands deployed on day 1, all but 12 were immobilized by explosions before 5 p.m. The Ferdinand's first battle revealed critical flaws. No firepower could make up for vulnerability to mines and infantry attacks, crippling their impact before the fight truly began. The 41st Panzer Corps, under General Josef Harpe, pushed toward the heavily fortified town of Ponyri. This stronghold in the 2nd Defensive Belt controlled vital roads and railways leading south to Kursk, making its capture essential for any breakthrough. The struggle for Ponyri became a vicious urban battle. German units captured half the town on July 7th after brutal house-to-house fighting. But a Soviet counterattack the next morning drove them back. Over the following days, control of Ponyri changed hands multiple times as both sides poured reinforcements into the meat grinder. German attempts to seize Olkovatka, another crucial high-ground position in the 2nd Belt, met similar frustration. Despite a concentrated attack on July 10th, involving 300 German tanks and assault guns supported by extensive air power, the Soviet lines held firm. Every attack was met with withering anti-tank fire and immediate counterattacks. The German 9th Army found itself trapped in a grinding battle of attrition, rather than achieving the swift breakthrough it sought. Gains fell far short of operational objectives. The cost in men and machines mounted with each passing hour. The northern pincer was failing to close. In the southern sector, General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army launched its offensive with tremendous force. Hoth's initial bombardment lasted 50 minutes. The barrage was intended to obliterate Soviet positions and clear the path for the armored spearheads. The 48th Panzer Corps led the charge, spearheaded by the elite Grossdeutschland Panzergrenadier Division. Its Panzer IIIs and IVs advanced alongside a company of 15 Tiger I tanks. Their 88mm guns and thick frontal armor designed to punch through enemy lines. The division moved in a Panzerkiel formation, an armor wedge with Tigers at the point and other tanks fanning out to the flanks. Infantry and combat engineers followed close behind, ready to clear obstacles and secure captured positions. However, the attack immediately encountered fierce resistance. The Panzerfusilier Regiment became trapped in a minefield. 36 new Panther tanks were immobilized by explosions. Soviet anti-tank and artillery fire rained down on the stranded regiment, while engineers worked frantically under fire to clear escape routes, suffering heavy casualties in the process. Despite these setbacks, the Grossdeutschland Division pushed through to capture the village of Butovo, while the 3rd Panzer Division on its left flank seized Gertsovka. To the east, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, under General Paul Hauser, launched its assault with 494 tanks and assault guns, led by 42 Tigers. SS combat engineers had cleared lanes through Soviet minefields under cover of darkness, allowing the attack to begin with momentum. By 9 a.m. on July 5th, the 3 SS divisions had broken through the 1st Soviet defensive belt. Their advance received strong support from Luftwaffe ground attack aircraft, which pounded Soviet positions ahead of the advancing tanks. Yet progress came at a price. The 3rd SS Panzer Division, tasked with protecting the right flank, found its advance slowed by a tributary of the Donets River and fierce resistance. Its limited progress exposed the entire Corps' flank to counterattack. A friendly fire incident added to the confusion when Luftwaffe aircraft accidentally bombed a German bridgehead, wounding commanders, including Walter von Hunnersdorf of the 6th Panzer Division. The Soviets continuously fed reserves, including tanks from the 1st Tank Army and the 5th Guards Tank Corps, into the path of the German advance, particularly toward the town of Prokhorovka. Each kilometer the southern spearhead gained signaled the showdown to come. While ground forces clashed below, the skies above Kursk saw continual aerial combat from July 5th through 9th, 1943. Joseph Stalin himself, monitoring the early days of the offensive, expressed his concern, asking, quote, "Do we have control of the air or not?" Rokossovsky could only promise that soon they would. German dive bombers, the notorious Junkers Ju-87 Stukas, demonstrated their lethal precision against Soviet armor. Pilots like Hans-Ulrich Rudel flew Stukas fitted with twin 37mm cannons, transforming them into tank hunters that struck from steep diving attacks. Rudel, a figure of legendary status, was credited with destroying hundreds of tanks. Yet the Stukas' slow speed made them vulnerable once they released their weapons. Ju-87 radio operator Hans Krohn described the terrifying experience, saying, quote, "We attacked at very low altitude. I often feared that we were going to hit a ground obstacle with our landing gear, and my pilot opened fire at the tanks from a distance of only 50 meters. That gave us very little margin to pull up and get away before the tank exploded." The Soviets hit back with the Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovik, heavily armored and lethal to ground targets, earning it the nickname Flying Tank. But its one major weakness was a vulnerable rear gunner, which German fighters targeted relentlessly. Crews flew in tight defensive circles, known as the Circle of Death, to protect each other, but losses remained high. Above the ground attack aircraft, dogfights filled the air as German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s clashed with Soviet Yakovlev Yak-9s and Lavochkin La-5s. The contest pitted individual German skill against growing Soviet numbers. On the morning of July 9th, a significant moment unfolded. Ivan Kozhedub, flying an La-5, spotted 2 Messerschmitt Bf-109s positioning for an attack. He described the encounter, quote, "I was the first to shoot. I held the firing button, squeezed, and blasted away a long burst, and it was sufficient. The leader turned over from his steep dive, and I saw him hit the ground." Kozhedub turned head-on toward the leader, securing his first aerial victory over the legendary German ace Günter Rall. The Soviet Air Force, initially suffering heavy losses, began adapting its tactics. It started massing formations and allowing fighter pilots more independent action, moving away from rigid command structures. This shift, combined with their numerical advantage, inflicted mounting losses among irreplaceable veteran German pilots. That same day, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov, a counterattack designed to trap German forces in Orel. Air superiority over Kursk remained contested as the battle entered its second week. The German 2nd SS Panzer Corps pressed its advance toward Prokhorovka. By the night of July 11th, General Paul Hauser's divisions had pushed to within 3 kilometers of the settlement. German headquarters received increasingly ominous reports, the distinctive rumble of tank engines growing louder as the Soviets moved massive formations into assembly areas just beyond Prokhorovka. Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army was positioning for a massive counterattack. Soviet artillery and Katyusha rocket regiments redeployed during the night, their barrels swinging toward German positions. At approximately 8 a.m. on July 12th, Soviet artillery erupted in a concentrated barrage. The ground trembled under the thunderous bombardment, disorienting Waffen-SS soldiers in their positions. Minutes later, Rotmistrov's voice crackled over tank radios throughout his command, ordering more, quote, "Steel, steel, steel." Down the western slopes before Prokhorovka thundered 5 brigades from the 5th Guards Tank Army. Hundreds of Soviet tanks surged forward, mostly T-34s, fast, reliable, and equipped with sloped armor that deflected rounds and a 7.62mm gun effective at close range. Among them rumbled KV-1s, slower but heavily armored, mounting the same gun and built to absorb damage and lead the assault. Infantry rode on the hulls, turning the advancing tanks into rolling fortresses. Waiting were dug-in SS Panzer divisions. Tigers opened fire with 88mm guns, capable of slicing through Soviet armor with ease. Panthers joined with their long-barreled 75mm guns, nearly as lethal, mounted on well-armored, agile hulls. Both tanks featured advanced optics and fire control, giving them lethal first-shot accuracy. The Soviets closed in fast, close enough to blunt the range advantage of the German guns. At such distances, even the T-34's gun could penetrate Panther and Tiger armor from the flanks. Tanks engaged at under 500 meters, sometimes under 100, where reaction time mattered more than optics. Vehicles weaved through burning wrecks, trading fire at near point blank. Some collided, others were hit before they could even maneuver. It was no longer about precision or position. It was about who could survive the crash. One Soviet veteran captured the scene, quote, "It was difficult to verify that anything remained alive in front of such a steel avalanche. Acrid gases from the exploding shells and mines blinded the eyes. Soldiers were deafened by the thunder of guns and mortars and the creaking of tracks." Neither the 5th Guards Tank Army nor the SS Panzer Corps fully accomplished their objectives. The Soviet counterattack, though suffering enormous losses, succeeded in stopping the German breakthrough attempt. Having reached its deepest penetration, the Germans now faced an even greater challenge as Soviet reserves continued pouring into the salient. Following the fierce clash at Prokhorovka, the German offensive at Kursk began losing momentum across all sectors. In the north, General Walter Model's 9th Army had exhausted its strength against the layered Soviet defenses. They had already lost 20,000 men and 200 panzers with minimal territorial gains. Further advances became impossible as Soviet counterattacks intensified. In the south, General Hauser's SS Panzer Corps found its advance checked. General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, which had begun the offensive with 916 panzers, was now reduced to just 500 operational vehicles. Even the famous pilot Hans-Ulrich Rudel expressed despair, saying, quote, "Not many words are spoken in our Gruppe during these days. Only what's most important is said. The severity of the struggle is weighing heavily on all of us. It's the same situation in all other units." German tank losses proved far more difficult to replace. Strained industry and dwindling manpower meant every lost Panther, Tiger, or veteran crew cut deep into Wehrmacht's strength. In contrast, the Soviet Union's vast industrial capacity and manpower reserves could absorb and replace losses at a much faster rate. Commanders like Model and Hoth faced a hard truth. Their objectives were slipping out of reach. Operation Citadel had failed to deliver a breakthrough. Even the German command was beginning to see Kursk as, quote, another Verdun. A new strategic crisis, however, would soon force Hitler to confront the reality of this stalled advance, and make a decision that would seal the fate of Operation Citadel. On the evening of July 12, 1943, Adolf Hitler summoned General Gunther von Kluge and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein to his headquarters at Görlitz in East Prussia. The atmosphere in the briefing room was tense, as disturbing news dominated the discussion. 2 days earlier, on July 10th, Allied forces had landed in Sicily, opening a new front in the Mediterranean. Hitler believed it was essential to halt the Kursk offensive immediately and redirect forces from the Eastern Front to defend Italy. Kluge, whose Ninth Army in the north had made minimal progress and was already facing intensifying Soviet counteroffensives, welcomed the decision to end the costly operation. Manstein fiercely opposed withdrawal. His southern forces had punched through miles of Soviet defenses and dealt heavy blows to enemy armor. He believed a breakthrough was near, one that would lead to open terrain where German tactical skill could crush Soviet reserves in a mobile battle. Manstein pressed his case with characteristic determination, claiming, quote, "On no account should we let go of the enemy until the mobile reserves he has committed are completely beaten." Hitler initially agreed to allow a temporary continuation of the offensive in the southern sector, but the very next day, he ordered Manstein's strategic reserve, the 24th Panzer Corps, to move south in support of the 1st Panzer Army, facing new Soviet threats. By July 17th, the powerful SS Panzer Corps, which had driven so deep toward Prokhorovka, received orders to end defensive operations and begin withdrawing. One division was transferred to Italy, while the other two were sent south to counter new Soviet advances. This crucial decision effectively terminated Operation Citadel. The battle was ending on Germany's terms, but it was not a victory, and it was not without consequence. With the German offensive faltering, the Red Army unleashed its counterattacks. Soviet counteroffensive operations, meticulously planned during months of defensive preparation, now exploded into action across multiple fronts. On July 12th, alongside the fierce fighting at Prokhorovka, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov against the Orel salient north of Kursk. Forces attacked from the east and north, spearheaded by elite infantry and tank corps, pressing hard to break through German defenses and reclaim lost ground. Soviet spearheads, despite taking heavy casualties, punched through German defensive lines and achieved significant penetrations. These thrusts immediately threatened German supply routes and endangered Model's Ninth Army with encirclement. Facing this severe threat, the Ninth Army was forced to shift entirely to defensive operations, diverting forces that had been committed to the Kursk offensive. In the south, the battered Voronezh front needed time to recover after heavy losses, delaying its counteroffensive until August 3rd. Before the main attack, Soviet diversionary strikes across nearby rivers pulled German reserves away, weakening their defenses. When the full assault began, Soviet forces smashed through the weakened northern flank of Army Group South, pushing rapidly forward. By August 5th, they had liberated Belgorod, and within a week, their spearheads reached Kharkov's outskirts. The Germans struck back fiercely with armored counterattacks, briefly halting the Soviet advance and inflicting losses. But the Red Army pressed on relentlessly, grinding through fierce urban fighting until Kharkov fell on August 23rd, sealing a decisive Soviet victory in the south. The Soviets now had undisputed control of the initiative on the Eastern Front. Germany's Operation Citadel advanced no more than 30 miles before Soviet counterattacks crushed their gains and forced a retreat. The cost was staggering. German losses included 165 to 200,000 men, nearly 3,000 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft. Soviet casualties were even higher, up to 1.2 million men and 7,000 tanks. Yet the Red Army absorbed the damage, struck back decisively, reclaimed lost ground, and seized lasting strategic initiative. The battlefield reflected the brutal price. Soviet journalist Ilya Ehrenberg described the scene, writing, quote, "Villages destroyed by fire, shattered towns, stumps of trees, cars bogged down in green slime, field hospitals, hastily dug graves. It all merges into one." British historian Robin Cross noted how, quote, "The Red Army had turned the tide at Stalingrad. It had seized the psychological advantage for the first time. But it was in the terrible fighting grounds near Kursk that Hitler's panzers and his ambitions were dealt a blow from which they never recovered. Kursk extinguished any hope of a fast and easy German recovery. For the Eastern Front, it was in many ways, quote, the last gasp of Nazi aggression." Thanks again to our sponsor, Lovable. To start building your dream app today, go to lovable.dev and use my code DarkDocsYT20 for 20% off. Valid until October 30th, 2025.